Welcome to Your Texas Land, a place where we take a deep dive into all things related to land in Texas. I'm your host today, Shane Kiefer, and I'm glad you are joining us. In each episode, we explore topics that might affect you as a landowner here in Texas. Today, I'm joined by David Riley from Plateau Land Wildlife Management, and we're going to be having a conversation about predator control, specifically how it relates to the wildlife tax valuation, but also a more general conversation about predator management and your land in general, why you might want to do it, how do you make those decisions, what's the difference in native and non-native predators. So we'll try to cover a little bit of everything. David, glad you joined us today. Welcome.
Wonderful. Looking forward to it. This is going to be a good conversation.
Always fun, sometimes controversial. We'll try not to get too controversial.
Yeah.
Today, we just want to lay out some of the common things that we hear, common topics of discussion that we get with landowners. And of course, as always, we're just a phone call away if you have specific questions about your property or your plan and how predator management may or may not fit into it. So let's start by just laying out real broadly the types, the categories of predators that we think about. And that typically starts with native predators and non-native predators. And talk about those. What are some common examples and how do we think about those things differently?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about predators when we meet with landowners, and one of the biggest things that pops up, and it's the first thing that pops in anybody's mind, is a feral hog. And that's easy for us to just say, okay, there's the non-native. So non-native and native is probably the easiest way to separate the two. Your non-natives being feral hogs, red imported fire ants are often kind of forgotten about in the predator control conversation. And then talking about your natives, things like your raccoons, your skunks, bobcats, mountain lions. There's a lot of
everything else.
Yeah, pretty much everything else. Some other non-natives falling in there being your starlings that fit in there. So there's a lot of variation when we start talking about predators. It's not just feral hogs. That's generally the what most people think of when we start talking predator control.
Absolutely. So, how do you approach those two different groups differently? Is it and so if I'm talking about if I say I've got a feral hog problem, what's the prescription? Yeah,
so I think bluntly stating, if it's non-native, it doesn't belong here. So all of them can go, and there's no problem with that. From a native perspective, we're looking into how that fits into your habitat management, how that fits into your wildlife management goals. And not necessarily does it mean having some native predators are a bad thing. Sometimes you need those native predators there to control that population of potentially white-tailed deer or control the population of small mammals on your property. It's not a bad thing to have a coyote or two running around to help out with that. But from a non-native perspective, feral hogs, if we can get rid of them all, we will. But
and can you? Have you figured that out?
No, if I figure that out, I will be making a lot of money.
That's true. You mentioned red imported fire ants or imported red fire ants, depending on your preference of acronyms. That's a really common predator we deal with as a company, right? Lots of landowners with red imported fire ant problems want to manage red imported fire ants. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Why that's so popular with our landowner base, at least?
So red imported fire ants are probably the most common predator. If you put it on paper and you start looking at landowners and the properties that we go to and the people that we talk with, almost every landowner's got a red imported fire ant problem at some point in time. Some years are worse than others. If you have a wet year, we're going to see them a lot more. But we have a lot of landowners that deal with that issue, and there's a lot of different prescriptions that you can do to manage red imported fire ants. That can be anything from a pesticide application. We've dealt with them with boiling water as well. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. There are organic baits out there as well that landowners will use. And really probably the trickiest part of dealing with red imported fire ants, and as a biologist that sees them all the time, I still deal with it, is identifying what is a red imported fire ant and what's a harvester ant or anything like that. They're little, they're small, It's very hard to make that. I'm not an entomologist by any means. So I take a lot of photos and send that to my entomologist friends and say, hey, what is this kind of thing. So identification of red imported fire ants is difficult. And being able to do that can help really have some success at managing red imported fire ants. We want to keep our native ants around. They're a food source for a lot of our songbird species. They can do some really good things for a habitat to have those ants around. And I say that there's a lot of times where you don't want harvester ants or wood boring ants right up against your house.
Or leaf cutters.
Or leaf cutters in your garden.
Yeah, sure,
So I get that situation, but we're talking about native habitat or wildlife habitat. Having them there is not a bad thing to have. So identification of the red imported fire ants is very important, and that can really play into how your treatment goes. If you've got a really bad case of red imported fire ants on your property, the boiling water method may not be the best option.
Probably going to be hard to get all the ants with boiling.
Depending on how much time you have on your hands.
That's right.
You can definitely, you could go that route, but a lot of times the pesticide application then at that point may be the better option to manage them.
Yeah, and even within applying pesticides, the approach you take, right? So we do a lot of individual mound treatment, and that's to keep from hitting those non-target ants that, so as you said, serve as a food source. They're important for the ecosystem. They're also competition for the fire ants that are there. But there are cases, especially to the east, where if you've got, 30, 40, 50, 100 mounds per acre, spot treat mounds isn't feasible, isn't advisable, actually. You're going to end up using more bait than if you're going to broadcast. So applying the right technique, like with lots of types of predator control, really important for imported red fire ants. So you're getting the benefit, but you're not negatively impacting non-target ants or species.
100%. And then, like I said, on the pesticide application side of it, there's, I would say maybe 100 different baits out there that you could use. That's probably an over exaggeration, but
there's a lot of choices.
There's a lot of different choices. Yeah.
Between baits and topical pesticides and those all work differently and not are all appropriate for pasture use either, right?
For sure, yeah. Depending upon what you're doing on your property, you want to make sure that you review that pesticide, make sure that it fits. If you're grazing a property, you want to, and you're turning around and selling that back to the market, the cattle back to the market, you want to make sure what you're putting out there is something that is not got restrictions on
it.
That's
right. Yeah. You don't want to be. Yeah, that's right. You don't want to be selling livestock that have been feeding on restricted use pesticide treated pastures.
And those are pretty clear most of the time.
Got to read the label.
Yeah, read the label. If you're not sure, wherever you buy it from, talk to whoever's selling it. They'll know that, especially if they're ag producers. That's one of the first things they're going to know about anything. So
that's right. That's good. Well, so that's a good segue into just how does predator control apply to the open space valuation? What are the requirements? How much do I have to do? What counts? If I go out and shoot a raccoon, does that count? If I go out and treat a fire ant mound, does that count? How do I know that I'm doing enough in regards to my property tax valuation?
So predator control is one of the 7 activity categories. So doing one activity inside of predator control can count towards your 3 that you would need to maintain the tax valuation. Predator control, however, is probably one of the most broad when it comes to recommendations that are in there. So unlike other activities that may give you very specific recommendations, 10 acres or 10% of the total acreage of the property or 10% of the zoned acreage that the biologist put on there, put on the wildlife management plan, a lot of your predator control activities are whatever's prescribed by your biologist. So any predator control activity, I highly recommend talk to a biologist, make sure that it fits into your plan, fits with your target species. Red imported fire ant treatment is probably has the most clear recommendations that are pretty straightforward. But beyond that, a lot of it is going to depend upon your property, your discussion with your wildlife biologist, and what really fits with your target species. If you're managing very heavily for white-tailed deer, more than likely a management program of skunks is not going to fit into that, just because it doesn't fit your target species. Doesn't mean you can't if you need to, but it's not going to be a qualifying activity that you're going to be carrying over.
So matching the predator with your target species, very important. Skunks being nest predators, right? So ground nesting birds, makes sense. Fire ants being predators of ground nesting birds and lots of other things as well. Small mammals, lizards, amphibians, pretty much anything that's at the ground level can be a problem in regards to fire ants. Matching those two things up, that's important. You mentioned fire ant control having a specific or a clear recommendation.
So red imported fire ant treatment can be 10 acres or 10% of the infested area, whichever is greater. And so, like I said, that's very clear and straightforward. The rest of them really don't have that.
Right.
It's all on recommendation based. And your biologist should have a good understanding of what those recommendations are going to be. It's going to, in my opinion, a little bit of common sense there. If you're hunting one time a year for feral hogs, that really doesn't qualify. You've got to put a good faith effort forward in that management practice for it to qualify.
Yeah, I think the guidelines say the predator management plan should be prepared by a competent professional. It actually uses that term. So and I think that's the intent there. Is it's not just I'm going to shoot a pig, and once a year while I'm out deer hunting, and that counts as my predator control. It's some sort of effort. We'll talk more about feral hog management techniques later, but that's probably a good example. So we talk sometimes about the with a lot of activities, but predator control particularly being about the effort, not the result, right? So talk about that in the context of feral pig control.
Yeah, so you can get credit and you can get a qualifying activity on feral hog control with never really harvesting a feral hog. If you can show that you have set traps, you can show that you have had hunting days or hunting nights. This goes back to documentation and making sure you're recording times that you're out doing those activities or setting the trap or monitoring the trap during a week's period or something along those lines. That can qualify as your activity. Now, with that being said, this is from a little bit of my history of doing the annual reporting for landowners. I recommend to landowners, if you have 2 or 3 years where you're setting a trap twice a week and you never caught a pig, maybe we need to go back to the root of that problem. Do you have a feral hog problem?
That's right.
Let's walk back to that and let's then reassess that activity. Does it make sense?
That's a good point. That's always the first question when you're talking about predator control or brush management or other land management issues where we perceive an issue is there a problem, right? Is there a problem related to my target species? Is there a problem related to my land? Have I ever seen a feral hog?
Yeah.
If not, I may not have a problem. Do I see any sign? Do I have any damage? Have I ever seen fire ants on my property? Are they causing me an issue? And for native predators in particular, I've probably got some. I've got coyotes, but are they a problem for my target species population? And should I control them or not? Should I invest the time and energy in?
Yeah, that's where that conversation goes back to the native, non-native. Non-native, it's pretty clear. Feral hog walked in front of the game camera. He's there. You can harvest him, and that's predator control. But non-native, when you get into that discussion, yes, I had that one coyote walk out in front of the game camera, and then I haven't seen him since, or I saw him 10 days later. Maybe that's not a problem. That's probably not of great concern. Still something to pay attention to. It's why I always recommend a census activity for any wildlife management plan, is you've got that ability now to assess it and build off of that.
Right. So, and that's exactly right. So we talk about coyotes specifically. The question I'll often ask is, all right, you perceive that as an issue. Do you have a fawn recruitment problem if white-tailed deer are your target species, or do you still have so many deer that you can't possibly harvest enough to keep them in check with your property? Those are two different issues, right? So if you have a fawn recruitment problem, then a coyote control's one thing to consider. And I've seen that on high fence ranches, but that was after a process of eliminating any other possible things. Is the habitat in good condition? Yes, it is. Should the deer population be higher? Yes, it should. Did it used to be higher? Yes, it should. Are we seeing lots of coyotes in this high fenced area? Yes, we are. And then actually collecting data on fawn recruitment and finding, you know what, it's really low. It should be higher given the condition of this property, the habitat, and all the other explanations are eliminated. And so coyote control was a proper prescription in that case. And the one I'm thinking of, after several years of pretty intensive control, they actually managed to get fawn recruitment back up. It did take several years of intensive control, and that's probably another good point to make is what do I have to do, not just to qualify, what do I need to do to actually have an impact?
Yeah, and that's going to take, depending upon the issue that you're running into and the targeted predator species, it could take several years, and it may be something that may never get under control.
That's right.
That is a very high likelihood that you spend a lot of time, money, effort controlling a species that you can't control, especially when we start talking low fence properties. High fence becomes a different discussion, becomes a little bit of an easier methodology of controlling something because they can't get in. But on a low fence property, you're kind of at will of what's around you. If you've got coyotes that are doing really well in the river bottom behind you that you don't own, or you can't go hunt, or you can't trap around there, it may not ever really matter how many you trap or how many you take on your property. They're gonna survive and do well.
Absolutely. Speaking of making sure that your predator problem is something that needs to be addressed and ensuring you get the right prescription for it, we do want to stress, again, particularly for the open space qualification, but in general, you want to make sure that your chosen predator is actually an issue for your target species. And not just something that's annoying or problematic for you and your house. You mentioned it with ants, right?
Yep.
And leafcutter ants are a problem around my garden, but are they causing an issue for me from a land management perspective? For my target species, they're not, right? They're just annoying. And so trying to control them isn't something I'm going to count as predator control activity for open space, but that extends to other common varmints.
Raccoons is a great example of that. Everyone hates raccoons because they are smart. They can figure out how to empty a corn feeder in a matter of a few hours. But just because they are and I'm going to put this in air quotes, predator of corn, doesn't make them a predator to your target species. If you may have a few raccoons on your property that are really annoying, but they're probably, unless you have a big infestation, probably not too terribly worried about them from a songbird standpoint, from a nest predator standpoint. Same thing with skunks. Everyone hates skunks in and around their house. You don't want to walk out in the middle of the night and have one sitting on the porch in front of you. For those of you with dogs, probably know exactly what I'm talking about. If you live out in the country with dogs, you've probably had a skunk incident at least once. And
had it happen in my neighborhood. Don't even have to live out in the country.
Yeah, but it's one of those situations where that native predator is a problem for us as humans, and that human wildlife interaction problem there, but they're probably not all the time causing a nest predator issue. So think about it from that perspective. And again, that's what your biologist is for. Your biologist is to give you that advice, give you those thoughts and questions. And again, how can you review into that? That's your census activity. That's how you can make those decisions, as well as your nesting boxes. If you're seeing, if we can put cameras, I've done that before, put a camera on a nesting box, and I see raccoons climbing up to a nest box, that maybe makes me think a little bit more, okay, maybe we are having that problem. They may not be able to get to it, but it is a problem.
For sure. So that's we want to make clear here too, we're not saying that you can't shoot raccoons or you can't control skunks because they're a problem for you. You can't control coyotes because you enjoy varmint hunting or whatever that may be. It's just a question of, is that a predator control activity that you're going to count towards your wildlife management plan? First. Second, is it a predator control activity that's actually having a positive impact on your target species, or is it just something you as a landowner enjoy doing or want to do for your own purposes? All those things are acceptable, but you need to understand why you're doing it to start. So let's talk about those native predators. We mentioned raccoons, skunks, coyotes. All of those are non-game species in Texas, right? No means or method restrictions, no timing restrictions, controls wide open. The prescription we're talking about is really for the tax valuation side of it. So those are the big ones. Mountain lions being in that group too. Right. The only other large predator we've got in the state's the black bear, which is protected. Right. Can't shoot black bears. But raccoons, skunks, coyotes, mountain lions, all non-game animals. But mountain lions, there's an important change this year.
Yeah.
Right.
Very recent change by Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission, actually passing some trapping regulations and some harvest recommendations on mountain lions. So some new changes to that being that if you are trapping mountain lions or trapping for the intent to trap a mountain lion, there's a 36-hour trap check now. So you would have to check those traps at least every 36 hours. That can be satisfied in a lot of different ways. Obviously, if you're near a trap that you're trapping for mountain lions and you can just drive past it every day or drive past it every other day, I guess within that 36 hours, then you would meet that trap check. Cameras can be utilized there. If you can utilize a camera to watch that trap and provide you that you're checking it all the time.
Or a cell cam, perhaps.
Or a cell cam,
right.
yeah. And there's cell cams have gotten so crazy technology at this point. You can have a camera in the bottom of a river and have it point to point to another camera, right. Then back to your phone. And you can get photos where there's no cell service at all. So that's one way of satisfying that trap check requirement. There's also some intricacies to that trapping regulation that Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission put out that allow you to still trap for feral hogs or trap for coyotes, thinking here whenever we're talking about snare traps, that allow those to not have to have that trap check requirement. So if you were to set that snare vertically and with a 10-inch diameter or less on it, then you would be able to not have to worry about that trap check. So if you're doing snares for coyotes or doing snares for feral hogs, they would still be able to be trapped and not have to have that trap check. I would still recommend checking your traps on a daily basis if you can. That's ethical trapping, for sure, in my opinion. But there's definitely some leeway in those regulations to allow folks that are still trapping for other native predators that may not fall underneath that mountain lion, not specifically going after mountain lions, that would still fall into that. So
yeah, for folks who may not be targeting mountain lions, but may not even know there's mountain lions in the area, but may incidentally capture a mountain lion, there are ways to ensure that you're not, if your intent is not to trap mountain lions, you're not under those new trapping restrictions. But it does not change, I don't think, anything about other types of harvest, right? So hunting or any means or methods, any changes to those for mountain lions?
A little bit, not in the way that you're probably thinking. So it does not allow you to do any type of canned hunting. So you can't trap a lion to then turn it out to hunt it. So yes, there is some, but not in the way that you're thinking. If you happen to be in a deer stand and you see a mountain lion walk out in front of you, you can still harvest that mountain lion. You can still do that. That's not restricted by any means. It's more the canned hunt side of things. They don't want people, rightfully so, don't want people trapping a lion to turn it loose. Specifically for hunting.
Yeah, gotcha. What about reporting requirements? Anything there?
I believe there's been some reporting requirement changes, and that if you're harvesting a mountain lion, they want to know about it. And to be honest, from a scientific standpoint, from a biologist standpoint, that's to get some data. Cats have been here longer than we have, so we need to understand a little bit more about them. And that's one way to do so, is understand their population, understand where they're at, and understand how many there are out there. Those are the kind of things that we need to help better assess these regulations and to maybe change them in the future. If we have a better understanding of the species, we can maybe make some changes to these regulations in the future.
Certainly, and that's really the source of a lot of this. Is we don't Parks and Wildlife hasn't been tasked with actively managing the mountain lion population because they're varmints, right? They're along those same lines. They don't actively manage coyote populations either, and this is so we don't have a lot of good information about how many are out there, where they are, other than incidental observations and sightings. It's worth noting, I think, that Texas is the only Western state without any mountain lion regulations.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Most states have a season and all kinds of restrictions on it. It's just kind of always been a free-for-all in Texas. And I think this was a real compromise to allow ongoing land management practices, livestock management practices where predation is an issue to continue, as well as other predator trapping to continue, but allow some data collection and reduce some of the biggest concerns around
100%. It wasn't to make those changes, to make that recommendation to the commission to get this voted through and passed through as new regulations wasn't an afternoon of a few biologists sitting at a table. It took several months, several meetings with stakeholders to get to a point where we've got something that can kind of move forward and to work with. Again, this is something to kind of get the ball rolling. Texas Parks and Wildlife, the commission, everyone has said that they may relook at some of these regulations in the future, talking with stakeholders, continuing to modify them as needed. It's just something that hasn't happened in Texas before. So we've got to start somewhere and work our way from there.
Sure. It's that's a whole nother podcast
Sure.
or two if we want to talk about how the Parks and Wildlife Commission works and how regulate. None of it's easy.
No.
Even seemingly simple things sometimes. And we're getting off topic, but this is an interesting intersection here where none of those changes are taken lightly or done easily. There's always a lot of stakeholder input. There's input from the biologists, input from other stakeholders, and the commission's got to sort through all that and come up with something that works. So it's not a job I envy, to be honest with you.
Not at all. Yeah, they have a tough job doing those kind of things. And again, they take in opinions and thoughts from every stakeholder out there. And in this particular case, dealing with livestock and that makes this a little bit more difficult. We're in Texas, we're a private land state. We have a lot of landowners that raise cattle, that it makes sense to do so. And so that had to be taken into account whenever they had this conversation.
Yeah, and of course, again, we're just talking about this in the context of if you're planning to do some predator control, mountain lions do have some new restrictions, moderate restrictions on them. The topic of mountain lion management, that's a whole nother podcast, which we're not going to deal with here, and certainly deals with some contentious topics at times. So we digress, but wanted to make sure you understood what the difference between those types of native predators were. So let's get into you mentioned it up top, and everybody's favorite predator, which is wild pigs, feral hogs, feral pigs, whatever you want to call them. And though I've heard a good argument for the wild pig designation, but everybody knows what we're talking about. Almost everybody's got them. Not quite everybody, but most everybody's got them, at least certainly where we work. And so let's talk a little bit about that, because that's a really common and easy predator control activity. Not easy to do, but easy to include predator control activity because they cause lots of damage. They actually predate on a lot of native wildlife species. They carry diseases. They are delicious. On top of that,
they're non-native.
They're non-native.
So we can make it very easy argument that if you see one,
you should shoot it.
You should shoot it, or you should remove it from the population because it's not supposed to be here, kind of thing. So it's a really easy predator control activity to recommend to anybody. You're on the eastern side of the state. We can pretty much write that into a plan, and I don't really have to discuss it too terribly much because it fits. There's very few properties on the eastern side of the state that don't have a feral hog problem, or just don't have feral hogs on their property. So yeah, feral hogs, again, we got to be careful here because we can talk about this for another few hours if we wanted to. But feral hogs is definitely fits into the predator control activity. And there's a lot of different methodologies out there on to manage feral hogs. We'll try to kind of highlight some of the few tools in your toolkit that you can have.
Which one's the bullet? Which one works the best?
Yeah, so that's usually the question I get from many landowners. I want to solve this problem. I want to remove feral hogs. I want to eliminate them from my property. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we've kind of moved on from a conversation of elimination and more about how do we mitigate the damage? How do we mitigate dealing with feral hogs on our property? And that all kind of depends on what the issue is. If you're a row crop farmer, you're going to worry about mitigating the damage on your row crops. You may not be really worried about them too much in that riparian area or in the creek bottom that's behind it. You're going to be more worried about how they're affecting your bottom line when it comes to money. When it comes to a habitat management standpoint, it's a little bit more broad. There, having feral hogs in a native habitat is that's counterproductive there. So it's a lot easier to say feral hogs just need to go from a habitat management, from a wildlife management standpoint. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it, but there's not one way. There's never going to be a silver bullet solution. There are things that work better in certain areas, in certain situations. But there's not a silver bullet if that's what we're looking for. So some of those options are trapping. Trapping is probably one of the more common ones that we talk with landowners about. There's a lot of different ways inside of that trapping. There's you can talk to any landowner and you can probably come up with a million different options for how to set a trap up, the types of trap to use. There's a lot of them out there that work, but it's another tool in that toolkit. Strategic shooting. So setting up in a strategic area, baiting that area, bringing the feral hogs into an area, and then eliminating them through shooting. So that's one way to go about it. Depending upon where you are in the state and kind of your vegetation cover, you can put a helicopter in the air. Not done it myself. I've always wanted to, but put a helicopter in the air and try to remove feral hogs that way. It's very efficient. It works really, really well. If you've got the low vegetation cover, you can see them as well as you can continue to track them and stay with them. It's a very good way of getting feral hogs off of a property, but it's not going to fit everywhere. You get to the eastern side of the state, it's too thick. There's no...
And lots of small properties too,
True,
right?
lots of small properties. You can't fly a helicopter over a 10-acre
Your neighbors would
property.
not like you much.
Yeah, not at all. However, you do get into some of those large row crop areas. That's very productive. If you can push some feral hogs into those row crop areas with a helicopter, you can have some pretty good success.
Yeah. And again, non-native, no means or method restrictions. You can hunt them at night. You can hunt them with spotlights. You can hunt them with thermal, which can be very effective as well. Lots of options for controlling them. You mentioned trapping. That's a process, right? It's typically not just put a trap up and they magically run into it and you can dispose of them. It's a process that can take time. A month maybe of pre-baiting sometimes, and then you're trying to catch the whole sounder, ideally.
And depending on who you talk to there, again, as a biologist, I have my recommendations, ways that I've seen worked, but a lot of my recommendations come from talking with landowners and what worked. Mm-hmm. What did they find that works? Again, there's different tales out there of what's the best thing. You can mix corn with diesel. That's a great method. Or mix it with old rancid beer. That's a great method. I stand behind, and there are some literature and some research out there, strawberry jello, strawberry soda, something along those lines, mixing that with corn. It works. Again, I don't write scientific papers myself, but reading through some of those, for some reason they like that smell, and I don't know what it is, but coming up with different methods and different ways to use that with your trapping methods is definitely a trial and error sometimes. There's plenty of times where you may set up a trap in a perfect area where you think it's going to work and put the right amount of bait out there, and you may never catch a pig. And then you may put it up in a spot that you don't think you're going to have a lot of luck, and the next night show up out there and you've got 30 of them in there. So the goal of it, yes, at the end of the day is to try to catch a whole sounder. You'll hear a lot of people talk about if you don't catch that pig, he's gotten smarter. I agree with that. Pigs are very, very intelligent animals. They may seem stupid at certain cases in certain situations, but they're very intelligent. If they learned something from a trapping method, then they may use that against you. And with that being said, that's why we go back to there's no silver bullet. There's no perfect identifiable way to do this, because if you hit them with a lot of different situations and a lot of different control methods, you're kind of keeping that intelligence from growing, if that makes sense.
Well, and that harassment too, right? Sometimes, especially on smaller properties, they cover large areas. They move move frequently, and sometimes just that on a small property, the harassment, the occasional hunting, the effort at trapping, the human presence and it does just push the problem off somewhere else. But if you're managing your property, that helps you accomplish your goal. Yeah. Hopefully you're not causing too much problem for anybody else. But if everybody's working to harass them, then hopefully in that area, then hopefully you can have some impact. And that's true with just like a lot of other wildlife management practices. The more neighbors you can get involved in helping out and approaching the same techniques. I know folks who've, because traps can be expensive, who've gone in and shared the expense of a trap and rotate it through, right? So you're mixing it up and you're spreading that cost out and that effort out over multiple landowners. And so you've got that impact to a larger area and hopefully some success. So
yeah, and you can definitely look at your property as well and think about what may be causing a feral hog problem too. That's something that's often overlooked. Feral hogs, yes, are everywhere. They're opportunistic. If they can find something to eat, they're going to use it. So sometimes it just may not matter. There may just be that big of a population that they're just going to be on your property. But a lot of times too, taking a step back, or maybe that 10,000 foot view of your property and thinking about what's drawing them my way. Well, if you've got that corn feeder out there that goes off every day at 7 a.m., 7 p.m., always full, that's probably drawing them your way. Something that may not be intentional, like a corn feeder. You've got maybe a peach orchard or something that you have on your property that's very productive, drops a lot of peaches. You can't eat them all, so you let them sit out there for wildlife to use. Well, pigs can sense that. Pigs come through, they see it. They're going to stick around that area. They may be bedding down in an area off your property, but they know to come there to get food and then leave. So keeping those things in mind, viewing it from that scope or that view can kind of help you develop a management plan for hogs.
That's a good point. Addressing the root cause is always the best starting approach. Am I doing anything to make my job harder?
Yeah.
Am I attracting them with all this corn I'm putting out? Should I be fencing my feeders to prevent that, to at least not encourage them? That's true for lots of predator issues as well, right? What's my root issue? Is it really habitat, or is it this predator problem that I think I've got? And again, that's all stuff that you should be discussing with a professional, with a biologist, to get the best sense. So you're not wasting time and energy and money on things that aren't gonna help and aren't gonna be successful long term. All right, last thing on feral hogs, we get a lot of questions about toxicants, poisons. Right, there've been a couple at least that have been explored over the past decade or so.
Yeah. Still being explored.
Yeah, where are we with toxicants?
Yeah, so a few years back we had toxicants really get brought up in the news. It was I won't say unexpected, but it kind of just got shot right to the forefront of feral hog management. Kaput was brought out, and it is a feral hog toxicant that hit the market, was immediately available to private landowners, and it immediately got pulled back off the market. There was a lot of pushback from private landowners, pushback from the scientific community, that there wasn't a whole lot behind it. There wasn't a whole lot of literature. So
pig hunters as well. Right?
Yeah, pig hunters as well. Folks that were concerned about, hey, what if I shot a pig that ate that, kind of thing. So it was brought out and immediately taken back off the market, sent back out to go do some more research, to see what effects it might have. I would say, and there's a roundabout timing, so a year and a half, somewhere in there, year and a half, 2 years, it came back to the market. And with some deeper research, some better understanding, as well as some regulations and some uses of how it's supposed to be used, and reading that label again, going back to that. So toxicant is available in Texas. It's something that you can use. Some of the literature out there has already pointed that it's just another tool in the toolbox. Again, it's not going to be a silver bullet. It can be fairly expensive, and so for maybe folks that have a very, very big feral hog problem, may not be cost efficient. It may be better to go towards a trap, may be better to mix and match those different methods. Again, that's always my recommendation, is to never choose one, choose several and go that route. So toxicants are out there. I haven't seen a huge push of folks using it, at least at this point, but it does get brought up at least a few times a year. Is this a right option for me? Is it something I should be looking at? But it kind of depends upon your property and does it fit?
So the important thing, it is there. It's available now. That's probably still a common question for folks, but there's necessarily lots of label restrictions, how you use it, how often you apply it, how you distribute it on the land, what you do, how do you dispose of dead animals, those sorts of things. Lots of so it's not an easy solution either. It's not just I'm going to throw some baits out and solve my feral hog problem, or kill a bunch of pigs and just let them go. So again, not the silver bullet that some folks thought or maybe were led to believe it might be. Or hope for. But it is something that is now on the market and available. And again, larger picture is you need to consider all these things. What's going to work best for your property? You need to talk with a professional who can help guide you and get you to the right place, so you're not spinning your wheels.
Yeah, a little trial and error never hurts either.
Absolutely.
Giving a couple different things a shot, see what works for you, what fits for your management. If you're not going to be on a property, if you're an absentee landowner and you don't live there, maybe only going to be there 4 times a year, a trap may not make sense, because you need to be checking that very often. You need to be setting it up. You need to be baiting it, trying to get pigs to come to it, and not being on the property makes that a little bit harder to do. So there's a lot of different methods out there. Again, talk with someone. They can give you even if that's a neighboring landowner that's been trapping or doing something for a long time, talk to them. See what may have worked for them. They may have a little secret that we are not aware of yet. So.
Absolutely. And I'll put my plug in. They really are delicious. I enjoy eating them. Frequently take pigs that other people don't want. I like them so much. So don't let anybody tell you otherwise. They are tasty. Yeah. It's just a matter of how you handle and prepare them. So that's do some control and get some free protein and do some good for your land at the same time. So all right. I think we've covered everything on our list. And as always, as we've mentioned several times, a lot of these are complicated problems. They're very property specific. They're target species specific. They're management plan specific. So you should always feel free to give us a call and ask questions. And the more we know about your property, the more specific we can be on recommendations. And sometimes, as David mentioned, it may start with, well, let's assess whether there's an issue. How do we do that? Maybe it's a survey, a camera survey. Maybe it's a drone survey, right? See what kind of issue we've got on the ground, and then talk about how that fits within your management plan. David, thank you for joining us. Thanks for talking about it. It's always fun to talk about, sometimes contentious to talk about, but always a good conversation. Appreciate having you here today.
Always. I enjoy doing this, enjoy getting to talk with you all about different things, and kind of just throwing out some point of views there.
Very good. Well, until next time, keep being an advocate for Texas land, and thanks for listening.